The sun had barely set, and the quiet hum of the city was starting to come alive with the buzz of nightlife. Along a well-lit boulevard lined with palm trees, a sleek, black luxury car rolled to a stop at the traffic light. Behind the wheel sat a young woman with a confident smile. Her name was Maya. She had worked hard for everything she owned. And that car wasn't just a vehicle, it was a symbol of her success, her independence, and the countless obstacles she had overcome. Maya was headed to meet some friends, her favorite playlist thumping softly through the speakers, when she noticed a police cruiser pull up in the next lane. She glanced over briefly, locking eyes with the officer behind the wheel. He was a middle-aged man with a cold, calculating stare, his jaw clenched as though he was sizing her up. Something about his expression sent a chill through her, but she quickly shook it off and returned her attention to the road. The light turned green, and Maya drove on, but the police car stayed close behind. A sinking feeling settled in her stomach when she noticed the cruiser's lights flicker on. The siren wailed, and she knew she had no choice but to pull over. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves as she eased her car to the side of the road. The officer approached her window with slow, deliberate steps. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming under the streetlights. Maya rolled down her window, her heart racing. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his tone overly formal but dripping with an edge of condescension. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" "No, officer," Maya replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. The officer's eyes swept over the car, then landed back on her. "This car doesn't seem like it belongs to you," he said flatly, his words laced with accusation. "Mind telling me how you got it?" Maya was stunned. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "This is my car. I've got all the paperwork if you need to see it." But the officer didn't seem interested in her explanation. He straightened up and glanced around, as if making sure there were no witnesses. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. "What? Why?" Maya asked, her voice trembling now. "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated, more forcefully this time. His hand rested on the holster at his hip, a silent but unmistakable threat. Reluctantly, Maya complied. She stepped out, clutching her purse tightly. The officer didn't waste a second. He leaned into the car, pulling the keys from the ignition, and then turned to her with a smirk. "Looks like this car is mine now," he said. "Consider it impounded." Maya's jaw dropped. "You can't do that. I didn't do anything wrong." She protested, but her words seemed to bounce off him like rubber bullets. The officer climbed into the driver's seat, his smug grin growing wider. "Take it up with the department," he sneered before slamming the door shut. Without another glance, he revved the engine and sped off, leaving Maya standing on the side of the road, stunned and helpless. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't think. Her mind raced, replaying the events in her head. How could something like this happen? How could someone sworn to uphold the law abuse their power so blatantly? But as the shock began to fade, a flicker of determination sparked within her. She wasn't going to let him get away with this. Meanwhile, the officer was enjoying his ill-gotten ride, the luxurious interior of the car making him feel invincible. He turned onto a dark, empty road, away from the main streets, reveling in his triumph. But his victory was short-lived. Just 3 minutes into his joyride, something unexpected happened. The dashboard lights flickered, and the engine sputtered. Confused, the officer pulled over and tried to restart the car, but it wouldn't budge. Instead, a strange voice echoed from the car's speakers. "Unauthorized driver detected," the voice announced in a calm, robotic tone. The officer froze, his confidence wavering. Before he could react, the car's locks engaged, trapping him inside. Panic set in as the lights dimmed, and the air grew heavy with tension. "What the?" he muttered, frantically pressing buttons and pulling at the door handle, but nothing worked. The car wasn't just a vehicle, it was equipped with cutting-edge technology designed to protect its owner, and it had detected that something was very, very wrong. Then the voice spoke again, this time addressing him directly. "You are not authorized to operate this vehicle. Security measures have been activated." The officer's arrogance crumbled, replaced by pure terror. He pounded on the windows, shouting for help, but there was no one around to hear him. The car began to emit a series of warning beeps, and a display on the dashboard lit up with a countdown. The officer's heart raced as he realized he had underestimated his target. This wasn't just about a stolen car anymore. This was a trap he had walked right into. Desperation took over, and he fumbled for his radio to call for backup, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely grip it. And then, just as he thought things couldn't get any worse, the voice returned, this time with a chilling ultimatum. "You have one chance to make things right," it said. "Return the vehicle or face the consequences." The officer's bravado was gone. All that remained was a man who had overplayed his hand and was now at the mercy of forces he couldn't control. And as the countdown ticked closer to 0, he realized there was only one thing he could do: beg for forgiveness. Inside the confined space of the luxury car, the officer's mind raced as the robotic voice repeated its warning. His hands were clammy, his breaths short and uneven. The countdown on the dashboard ticked ominously, each number flashing brighter than the last. It wasn't just a timer. It felt like a judgment, an unrelenting force closing in on him. His radio crackled to life, briefly pulling his attention away. "Officer Daniels, do you copy?" a voice from dispatch asked. It was a routine check, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding on the other end. He grabbed the radio, his voice trembling as he replied. "Yes, hi. I'm handling something," he stammered. "I'll check back in soon." He quickly set the radio down, knowing full well that explaining his situation was out of the question. How could he admit what he had done? How could he say he was trapped in a car he had no right to take? Maya, meanwhile, wasn't wasting time. She had already called a friend to come pick her up, but as she waited by the side of the road, her anger grew with each passing minute. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contacts, stopping when she reached a name she hadn't called in years: her brother, Malik. Malik was sharp, resourceful, and unyielding when it came to injustice. If anyone could help her figure out what to do, it was him. When he picked up, his voice was calm, but instantly alert. "Maya, what's going on?" She took a deep breath, her voice shaking as she recounted everything. The stop, the officer's accusations, and how he had driven off with her car. By the time she finished, Malik's tone had shifted. He was furious, but his anger wasn't reckless. It was focused. "Don't worry," he said firmly. "We'll handle this. That car has a built-in tracker, right?" Maya nodded, realizing he couldn't see her. "Yeah, I can pull up its location right now." "Good," Malik replied. "Send me the details, and stay where you are until your friend gets there. I'm coming to meet you." As soon as the call ended, Maya felt a small sense of relief. She wasn't alone in this, and she knew Malik wouldn't let the officer get away with what he'd done. But there was still a gnawing sense of unease. Something about the way the officer had acted didn't sit right with her. It wasn't just his abuse of power. It was the cold, calculated way he'd done it, as though this wasn't the first time he pulled a stunt like this. Back in the car, Officer Daniels was losing his composure. The countdown had reached 30 seconds, and every attempt to override the system had failed. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel, cursing under his breath. Then, as the timer dipped below 20, the car's headlights suddenly flashed, and the dashboard lit up with a new message: initiating lockdown protocol. "No, no, no," Daniel shouted, his voice cracking. He was about to try breaking a window when the voice returned, cold and unyielding. "You have one final opportunity to comply. Failure to do so will result in escalation." Daniels froze. Escalation. What did that mean? He didn't want to find out. Swallowing what little pride he had left, he grabbed his radio again. "Dispatch, I need immediate assistance," he said, his voice a mix of desperation and fear. I'm, dealing with a vehicle malfunction. Vehicle malfunction, the dispatcher repeated, clearly puzzled. Do you need a tow? Daniels hesitated. How could he explain this without incriminating himself? Just send backup, he muttered, his eyes darting around the car as though it might spring a new trap at any moment. Meanwhile, Malik had arrived to pick up Maya. He was driving an older car, nothing flashy, but it was reliable. As Maya climbed in, she handed him her phone with the tracker app open. The car's location was pinging on a small winding road just outside the city. Malik glanced at it, his jaw tightening. He didn't go far, he said, his voice low. Let's see what he's up to. They drove in silence for a while, the tension in the car palpable. Maya stared out the window, her thoughts racing. She kept replaying the officer's sneer, the way he had dismissed her protests as if she were invisible. It wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about standing up to someone who thought he could do whatever he wanted just because he had a badge. When they finally reached the location, they spotted her car parked on the side of the road, its hazard lights flashing. Malik pulled over a short distance away, and they both got out, approaching cautiously. As they drew closer, they could hear muffled sounds coming from inside, thuds and panicked shouts. What's going on? Maya whispered. Malik shook his head. Stay back, he said, his tone protective but firm. He stepped closer, peering into the driver's side window. What he saw made his eyes widen. Inside, Daniels was frantically trying to break free, his face pale and drenched in sweat. The car's locks were still engaged, and every button he pressed seemed to trigger another warning from the system. Malik couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. The man was getting a taste of his own medicine. But Malik wasn't just here to watch. He turned to Maya, his voice steady. Call the police, he said. The real ones. Maya hesitated. Do you think they'll actually do something? They will, Malik said. And if they don't, we'll make sure they have no choice. This guy's not getting away with this. As Maya pulled out her phone, Malik leaned against the car, crossing his arms as he stared down at Daniels. The officer looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and desperation. He pounded on the window, shouting something that was muffled by the glass. Malik didn't flinch. You wanted this car so bad, he said calmly, his voice just loud enough to be heard. How's it working out for you? Daniels didn't respond, his attention now fixated on the flashing countdown that had reappeared on the dashboard. Malik glanced inside, noting the timer, and a flicker of concern crossed his face. He didn't know what the car's security system was capable of, but he didn't want to find out the hard way. Maya finished her call and joined him. They're sending someone, she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. They said to stay here and wait. Malik nodded, but his eyes remained on Daniels. Good, he said. Let's see how this plays out. As the minutes ticked by, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. For the first time, Daniels seemed to relax, a faint glimmer of hope returning to his eyes. But Malik and Maya knew better. This wasn't the kind of situation you could talk your way out of. Not anymore. The sirens grew louder, echoing through the quiet road like an approaching storm. Maya and Malik stood a few feet from the car, their eyes locked on the figure trapped inside. Officer Daniels was visibly unraveling, his confident facade long gone. He was now slamming his fists against the interior of the car, yelling incoherent words that were lost behind the reinforced windows. Maya couldn't help but feel a small surge of satisfaction. This was a man who had tried to strip her of her dignity, her rights, and her hard-earned belongings, and now he was at the mercy of forces he couldn't manipulate. Still, there was an undercurrent of unease. She didn't know what the car's security system would do next, and the countdown on the dashboard didn't feel like an empty threat. Malik leaned closer to the window, his expression a mix of curiosity and frustration. Looks like karma's working overtime tonight, he muttered, mostly to himself. Daniels heard him and banged on the glass, his face twisted in a combination of rage and desperation. "Get me out of here," Daniels shouted, his muffled voice barely audible. Malik smirked. "Why should we? You had no problem taking what wasn't yours. Now you're stuck with it." Maya placed a hand on Malik's arm. "We can't just leave him like this," she said quietly, though there was no sympathy in her tone. "Let's wait for the other officers to deal with him." Malik nodded, but his focus stayed on Daniels. There was something unsettling about the man's behavior. His panic felt too raw, too extreme for someone simply caught in their wrongdoing. Malik started to wonder if there was more to the story, something deeper and more sinister lurking beneath the surface. The first police car arrived moments later, its lights flashing red and blue across the empty road. Two officers stepped out, their movements cautious as they approached the scene. Maya and Malik quickly explained what had happened, showing them the tracker app and recounting how Daniels had stolen the car. The officers exchanged a look, their faces a mix of disbelief and irritation. One of them, a tall man with a steady demeanor, walked over to the luxury car and peered inside. Daniels was shouting now, pleading for help, his hands pressed against the window. "Officer Daniels," the tall man said firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "What's going on here?" Daniels shook his head frantically. "It's the car. It's malfunctioning. It locked me in, and I can't get out. Just get me out of here." His tone was erratic, almost unhinged. The officer glanced back at Maya and Malik. "You're sure this is your car?" he asked Maya. She nodded, holding up her phone. "I have all the paperwork and the app tracking it. He pulled me over for no reason, accused me of stealing my own car, and then took off with it." The other officer, a woman with sharp eyes, stepped closer to Maya. "Do you have the registration and proof of ownership?" Maya quickly pulled out a folder from her bag, handing it over. The officer examined it closely, her expression softening as she handed it back. "It checks out," she said. "This is her car." The tall officer sighed, turning back to Daniels. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. "I can't," Daniels yelled, his voice cracking. "The locks are jammed, and the car won't respond." The tall officer frowned and tried the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The car's security system had clearly taken over, and there was no manual override in sight. The tension in the air thickened as everyone realized just how dire the situation was. Then the robotic voice returned, calm and detached. "Final warning. Unauthorized use detected. Escalation protocol will commence in 60 seconds. The officers froze, their eyes darting to the dashboard where the countdown had restarted. The woman officer pulled out her radio, calling for backup and specialized assistance. "We need a tech team out here ASAP," she said, her voice steady despite the urgency. Maya's heart pounded as she watched the scene unfold. She had never seen the car's security system activate like this before. It was designed to protect her, but she hadn't expected it to escalate so aggressively. She glanced at Malik, who was watching intently, his jaw clenched. "Do you think it's going to do something dangerous?" Maya whispered. Malik shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but whatever happens, that guy brought it on himself." Inside the car, Daniels was losing it. He was clawing at the doors, kicking the dashboard, and shouting incoherently. The officers outside were trying to calm him down, but it was no use. The man was a bundle of raw nerves, and every second that passed only made it worse. The countdown hit 30 seconds. The robotic voice spoke again, this time with more urgency. "Escalation protocol imminent. Evacuate unauthorized personnel immediately." The woman officer stepped back, her face pale. "We need to get him out of there now," she said to her partner. "We don't know what this thing is going to do." The tall officer nodded, pulling out a tool from his belt. He moved to the driver's side window, signaling for Daniels to back away. But Daniels was too far gone to listen, his panic blinding him to everything else. "Step back," the tall officer shouted, his voice sharp. Finally, Daniels scooted away from the window, his eyes wide with terror. The officer swung the tool, smashing the glass with a loud crack. Shards scattered across the seat, and the officer reached in to unlock the door manually. The locks clicked open, and Daniel scrambled out, falling to the ground as if he'd just escaped a burning building. He was shaking, his face pale and drenched with sweat. The other officers moved quickly, pulling him to his feet and handcuffing him without a word. Maya and Malik watched in silence, their emotions a mix of vindication and disbelief. The man who had terrorized Maya just hours earlier now looked broken, a shadow of the arrogant officer who had stolen her car. But the tension wasn't over. The countdown on the dashboard continued to tick down, and the car itself seemed to hum with a low, ominous vibration. Everyone stepped back, their eyes fixed on the vehicle as the final seconds approached. 10, 9, 8. Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. She reached for Malik's hand, gripping it tightly. The officers backed away further, pulling Daniels with them, as they waited to see what would happen. 3, 2, 1. The car went silent. The humming stopped, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, the robotic voice spoke one final time. Escalation protocol complete. Threat neutralized. Nothing else happened. The car's lights dimmed, and the countdown disappeared from the dashboard. The group stood frozen, unsure if it was truly over or if the car had one last surprise in store. The silence that followed felt louder than any of the chaos that had preceded it. Everyone stood frozen, staring at the car as if it might spring back to life at any moment. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, and even Malik, who had been calm and confident throughout, seemed on edge. Maya kept her grip on his hand, her pulse still racing. Whatever had just happened, it didn't feel over. Officer Daniels, now restrained and subdued, let out a shaky breath. "You see, I told you, there's something wrong with that car." His voice was hoarse, but the defiance that had fueled his earlier arrogance was gone. He looked more like a man trying to justify his fear than someone making excuses for his actions. The taller officer glanced back at the vehicle, frowning. "It's just a security system," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "A high-tech one, sure, but it's not supposed to act like this." He stepped forward cautiously, peering into the car. Everything looked normal now. The dashboard lights were off. The locks were disengaged, and the engine was silent. But there was a tension in the air, a sense that something still lingered beneath the surface. Maya hesitated, then spoke up. "That's not how it usually works," she said. "I've had this car for years, and it's never done anything like this before. It's only supposed to lock down if someone tries to steal it." The female officer turned to her, her expression skeptical, but not dismissive. "And you're sure you've never activated any kind of advanced features? Something experimental, maybe?" Maya shook her head. "No, I've never even heard of those. I bought it brand new, and I've only used the basic security functions. Whatever this is, it's not normal." Before anyone could respond, a low, rhythmic beeping started emanating from the car. It was faint but steady, like a heartbeat coming from deep within the vehicle. Everyone turned to look, the sound cutting through the stillness like a warning. The officers instinctively reached for their radios, while Malik stepped protectively in front of Maya. "What now?" the taller officer muttered, edging closer to the car again. He reached for the door handle, but the moment his hand touched it, the car's lights flickered on, and a new message appeared on the dashboard. "System diagnostic in progress. External interference detected." The female officer backed away quickly, pulling her partner with her. "That's not a diagnostic," she said, her voice sharp. "Something's triggering it." Maya's stomach tightened. "What do you mean? External interference? Like someone's hacking it?" Malik's expression darkened. "If that's true, then this isn't just about you or the car. Someone might have planned this." The implications of his words sank in quickly. If the car's bizarre behavior wasn't a malfunction, but rather the result of someone deliberately tampering with it, than everything that had happened so far. Daniels taking the car, the security lockdown, even the countdown, might have been orchestrated by an unseen hand. But why? And who would go to such lengths? As if to answer their unspoken questions, the car's robotic voice returned, louder and more authoritative than before. Unauthorized access logged. Identifying source. Tracking initiated. The beeping grew faster, more insistent, and the car's GPS screen lit up, displaying a map with a single red dot moving across it. The officers leaned in to get a better look, their professional detachment giving way to genuine concern. "That's not a local signal," the female officer said, studying the map. "It's coming from somewhere much farther away." "How far?" Malik asked, stepping closer. The officer hesitated before answering. "It looks like another state, but it's moving. Fast." Maya's breath caught in her throat. "So someone is controlling it. From miles away." The tall officer straightened, his expression grim. "It's possible. If this car has internet connectivity, someone could be accessing it remotely. But this kind of tech, it's not something you'd find on the black market. This is advanced, military grade, even." Daniel, still restrained and visibly shaken, started mumbling under his breath. "I knew it. I knew there was something off about this car. You don't get something that's sleek without strings attached." Maya shot him a glare. "You don't get to talk about my car like that after what you did." But Daniels wasn't listening. His eyes were darting around, as if searching for an escape route. The tall officer noticed and tightened his grip on the man's arm. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly. The GPS screen suddenly zoomed out, revealing more of the map. The red dot had stopped moving, now hovering over a specific location. Coordinates appeared on the screen, along with a cryptic message, awaiting confirmation. "Secure transmission active." Malik's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean? Confirmation of what?" No one had an answer. The officers called for additional backup, requesting a technical team to analyze the car's system. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. This was no longer about a stolen car or a rogue security feature. Someone was using her car as part of something much larger, and the stakes were rising by the second. Then, without warning, the car's engine roared to life. The lights flared brighter than ever, and the doors slammed shut on their own. The robotic voice spoke again, this time with a chilling finality. "Override engaged. Destination locked. Commencing operation." The car lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement as it sped off down the road. Everyone scrambled to react. The officers jumped into their patrol car, shouting into their radios, while Malik grabbed Maya's arm, pulling her toward his own vehicle. "Come on," he said. "We're not letting this thing get away." Maya hesitated for a split second, her heart pounding. "But what if it's dangerous?" Malik gave her a determined look. "It's your car, Maya. We're not letting whoever's behind this win." She nodded, climbing into the passenger seat as Malik started the engine. They took off after the runaway car, the patrol car already in pursuit ahead of them. The night air was thick with tension, the sound of sirens and screeching tires echoing through the empty streets. As they sped after the car, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that they were chasing more than just a stolen vehicle. This was about control. Control over her property, and possibly over something much bigger than they could comprehend. The thought made her grip the edge of her seat tightly, her mind racing with questions she couldn't yet answer. Whoever was behind this had gone to extraordinary lengths to manipulate the situation, and they weren't done yet. The red dot on the car's GPS screen loomed in her mind, a silent reminder that the true destination and the true purpose of this twisted game was still ahead. The chase stretched across winding roads and empty intersections, the runaway car a streak of steel and light tearing through the night. Malik kept his hands tight on the wheel. The tension etched across his face. Maya sat rigid in the passenger seat, her eyes locked on the patrol car ahead of them and the distant blur of her vehicle. Every nerve in her body buzzed with adrenaline. They're leading us somewhere, Malik said, his voice low but firm. This isn't random. Maya nodded, her thoughts racing. Whoever was controlling the car knew exactly what they were doing. The calculated movements, the cryptic messages, it all pointed to something far more sinister than a simple hack. But why her car? Why tonight? As they crested a hill, a vast industrial complex came into view, its silhouette looming against the moonlit sky. The patrol car had slowed, its sirens cutting off abruptly. The officers stepped out cautiously, weapons drawn, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. Malik pulled up a safe distance behind them, turning off the engine. "Stay here," he told Maya, but she shook her head firmly. "No way," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "This is my car. I need to see this through." Reluctantly, Malik nodded, and the two of them followed the officers on foot, their steps careful as they approached the towering gates of the complex. The car had come to a stop just inside, its lights still glowing like a predator waiting in the shadows. The robotic voice from earlier echoed faintly through the air, repeating a single phrase, awaiting confirmation. One of the officers turned to his partner. "This place isn't in use anymore," he said quietly. "It's been abandoned for years." "Then why here?" The female officer replied, her flashlight sweeping the area. "What's the connection?" Before anyone could answer, the gates creaked open on their own, the sound grating against the quiet night. The car's engine revved again, rolling forward into the complex. A floodlight snapped on overhead, illuminating the scene with stark, white light. It revealed more than just the car. It revealed a figure standing near the entrance, their face obscured by the glare. "Stop right there," the taller officer shouted, his weapon trained on the figure. The person didn't move at first, but then slowly raised their hands in a gesture of surrender. As they stepped into the light, Maya's breath caught in her throat. It was a man, dressed in nondescript clothing, with a calm yet unsettling demeanor. He looked ordinary, almost forgettable, but there was something about his eyes, sharp, calculating, and entirely too aware of the chaos he caused. "You've got questions," the man said, his voice smooth and composed. "And I have answers." The officers exchanged wary glances before the taller one gestured for the man to step closer. "Start talking," he said. "What's going on here?" The man smiled faintly, his gaze flicking to Maya and Malik before returning to the officers. "This isn't about the car," he said simply. "It's about control. About showing how easy it is to take something and someone you think is untouchable and turn it into a tool for something bigger." Maya felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. "You hacked my car for some kind of experiment," she demanded. The man's expression didn't change. "Not just your car. The technology in vehicles like yours is a gateway, a test run for what's possible. But yours was special. The modifications, the systems, it made the perfect candidate." "What modifications?" Malik asked sharply, stepping forward. "What are you talking about?" The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering how much to reveal. "The security system you've relied on wasn't just built for theft prevention," he said. "It's part of a larger network, one that's capable of far more than you realize. And tonight, it proved just how effective it can be." Maya's mind reeled. She had trusted her car, never questioning the technology that came with it. The idea that it had been part of something bigger, something beyond her understanding, made her stomach churn. The female officer stepped forward, her weapon still raised. "You're under arrest," she said firmly. "Whatever you think you've accomplished here, it ends now." The man didn't resist as she moved to restrain him, but his calm demeanor never wavered. "You think this ends with me?" he said, his tone almost amused. This was just the beginning. Before anyone could react, the car's headlights flared brighter than ever, casting long, sharp shadows across the complex. The robotic voice returned, louder and more commanding than before. "Override complete. Operation finalized. Disconnecting." The engine roared to life again, But instead of moving forward, the car powered down entirely, the lights fading until it was nothing more than a silent hunk of metal. The tension in the air broke, replaced by an eerie stillness. The officers hauled the man to his feet, leading him away toward the patrol car. Maya and Malik stayed behind, staring at the now dormant vehicle. "What just happened?" Malik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Maya admitted, "but I don't think this is over." As if on cue, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart sinking as she read the message on the screen. "Thank you for participating. Your car has been restored to factory settings." "What does that mean?" Malik asked, peering over her shoulder. "It means whoever did this got what they wanted," Maya said, her voice shaking. "And now they're done with me." The finality of her words hung heavy in the air. The officers returned moments later, their prisoner secured and their own expressions grim. "We'll look into this," the female officer assured Maya. "But you should be careful. Whatever's behind this, it's bigger than just one stolen car." Maya nodded numbly, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and confusion. As she and Malik walked back to their car, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched, that this strange and terrifying night was only the first chapter of a much larger story. The drive home was quiet, the events of the night weighing heavily on Maya and Malik. The city streets were eerily empty, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, and the hum of the car engine seemed louder than it should have. Maya stared out the window, her mind spinning with unanswered questions, and the unsettling realization of how little control she had over something she had once thought of as her own. "What do you think they were trying to do?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but Malik could hear the strain behind it. "I don't know," Malik admitted, his hands gripping the wheel. "But it's clear this wasn't random. That guy said it himself. Your car was special. They chose it for a reason." Maya frowned, her fingers tracing absent patterns on the fabric of her jeans. "But why me? I don't have anything to do with whatever that was." Malik glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe it wasn't about you. Maybe it was just about the car itself. The tech, the systems, it's advanced in ways most people don't even think about. They could have been testing something, using it as a proof of concept." The idea didn't bring Maya much comfort. She thought about all the times she had driven the car, trusting it to get her safely from one place to another, never considering that it could be manipulated or used against her. It felt like a betrayal, even though she knew the car wasn't alive. She sighed, leaning her head back against the seat. "I'm not sure I can trust it anymore," she said quietly. Malik nodded. "I get it. But it's not the car's fault. It's the people behind this, whoever they are. They're the ones who did this, not you." Maya appreciated his attempt to reassure her, but the unease lingered. Even as they pulled into her driveway and Malik shut off the engine, the night didn't feel like it was over. She hesitated before getting out of the car, her hand hovering over the door handle. "You don't have to stay here alone," Malik said, sensing her hesitation. "I can stay over, just in case." Maya managed a small smile. "Thanks, but I think I'll be okay. I just need some time to process everything." He didn't press her, nodding as he stepped out of the car and walked her to the door. "Call me if you need anything, okay? And don't let this scare you off from driving. You've got every right to feel safe in your own car." Maya nodded, his words echoing in her mind as she watched him drive away. Inside the house, she locked the door behind her, double-checking it out of habit before heading to her bedroom. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, and she picked it up, half expecting another cryptic message. Instead, it was a notification from the car's app. Factory settings restored. All data wiped. She stared at the screen, the weight of those words sinking in. Everything the car had been through tonight, the strange messages, the commands, the overrides, was supposedly gone. But was it really? Could she trust that whoever had been behind it wouldn't find a way back in? She set the phone down, her thoughts spinning. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, and for a brief moment, Maya felt a sense of normalcy return. She got up, made coffee, and tried to distract herself with a book, but the events of the previous night lingered in the back of her mind. It wasn't until a knock at the door startled her that she realized she'd been on edge the entire time. Opening the door, she found one of the officers from the night before, the tall one who had been part of the chase. He looked more relaxed now, his demeanor professional, but not as tense as it had been. "Ms. Jackson," he said, nodding politely. "I wanted to stop by and give you an update." Maya invited him in, her curiosity piqued. The officer declined a seat, standing by the door as he spoke. "We've done some digging into the man we arrested last night. Turns out he's part of a larger group, one that's been experimenting with advanced vehicle tech for questionable purposes." Maya folded her arms, her unease growing. "What kind of purposes?" The officer hesitated before answering. "We're still piecing it together, but it looks like they've been using cars like yours to test remote control systems. They claim it's for research, but there are clear security risks involved. Your car was targeted because its systems are particularly advanced and, let's say, compatible with their methods. Will they be able to do it again?" Maya asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "We don't think so," the officer said. "The modifications they made have been wiped clean. But I'd recommend having a professional inspect the car just to be safe. And if you notice anything unusual, report it immediately." Maya nodded, feeling a small sense of relief but still wary. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." The officer nodded again, tipping his hat before leaving. Maya closed the door behind him, leaning against it as she processed what he'd said. The people behind this might have been stopped, but the idea that her car had been used as part of some larger scheme still left her unsettled. Later that day, she took the car to a trusted mechanic, who assured her it was safe to drive. Still, as she got behind the wheel, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She wasn't just driving a car anymore. She was driving a reminder of how vulnerable even the most advanced systems could be. As she pulled out of the driveway, the car hummed to life, its smooth engine a familiar sound. The road stretched ahead, and for the first time in hours, Maya felt a small sense of control return. She didn't know what the future held or if she'd ever fully trust the car again, but she did know one thing. She wouldn't let fear dictate her life. Whatever had happened that night, it had taught her a valuable lesson about resilience and vigilance. Technology might be powerful, but so was she. And as the sun set on another day, Maya decided that she would move forward, 1 mile at a time.